Hello and welcome back. This is Dr. Kolodnicki talking about Elementary edTPA Task 4, which is the math component, specifically speaking about the assessment commentary, prompts 3 and 4. If you're watching this video, you may want to jump back to my video on prompts 1 and 2 first, or any of my other edTPA elementary videos specifically talking about Task 4. Okay, so from where we started, you had prompt 1 and prompt 2. Prompt 1 is you analyze the data from your from your assessment, and then prompt 2, you're going to focus on your 3 focus students, specifically discussing where their areas of need are. So now when we move on to prompt 3, we're talking about your re-engagement lesson. So based on how your original lessons were taught, you may want to focus your lesson, your re-engagement lesson, on maybe less objectives. You might want to spend more time with students, maybe doing some exploring on their own, using manipulatives or technology-based tools. It should not, I repeat, should not be more of the same lesson that they just got from their teacher. Again, if you watch my video or some of my earlier videos, I highly recommend doing Task 4 at the very beginning of your student teaching placement, because it does allow your your cooperating teacher to teach the learning segment, and your focus should just be on designing the assessment, giving the assessment, analyzing the assessment, and then prompt 2, writing about your focus students. And then obviously now we're going to get into teaching a re-engagement lesson and then analyzing your results from that lesson. Not only do you need to plan a lesson, a re-engagement lesson, you also need to plan for some formative assessments that go with that lesson. So let's get into that a little bit. So prompt 3, you have to start with a targeted learning objective, obviously based on the collective struggles of your 3 focus students. Let's say something like, it's the conceptual understanding of fractions, if you remember my example from the prompt 1 and 2 video. So you want to make your objective very specific to that. Students need to understand the concept of a fraction, that a fraction represents a ratio of a part to a whole. And there you go. You have to describe your re-engagement lesson in part B. So typically I would recommend you almost going through, or at least sketching through, a formal lesson plan just to give yourself the structure of that, and then write it in a narrative form, because they're asking for a narrative form. Obviously your learning objectives, state standards, strategies and tasks, so things that you're asking your students to do. Representations. So representations are a very specific part of math. I mean, that's basically math. Math is diagrams, graphs, physical tools like manipulatives, context. What does a ratio mean in what context? Symbols, tables. So anything that represents the math that you're talking about should be included, and you should describe kind of how you're using representations to promote and develop your students' understanding. And then finally, formative assessments. I mean, there are multiple ways to assess a student. You have to think about, especially in terms of what you're analyzing, what your objective is. So it could be all parts of the CPP. It could also just be one specific part, like conceptual understanding that your students struggled with. But formative assessments are very vast. It could be thumbs up, thumbs down, an exit ticket, an entrance ticket. It could be whiteboard work. You're asking them to do a problem. It could be a discussion. So again, depending on your lesson, it could be almost all of those all wrapped in one. You might want to give your students multiple opportunities during your little re-engagement lesson. It could be a mini lesson, but you want to give them multiple opportunities for you to kind of assess where they're at. And again, independent work on their own. You don't want them collectively assessed. So again, take care of that. If you are here and you're one of my EDI 613 students, instead of prompt 3, because you are pre-service teachers, you're going to just write a full lesson plan using a template. So you're not going to answer prompt 3, you're just going to provide me with your full lesson plan. Again, not only do you have a lesson plan, but you also need formative assessments. Lessons should have multiple opportunities for students to check their understanding. Again, this can be done through observations, sticky notes, whiteboard work, assigned problems, entrance tickets. It can even be discussion. So you may want to consider not only maybe videoing your re-engagement lesson, but maybe also audio recording it and then taking photos of any work that students have shown, or taking, if it's on paper, taking and scanning and copying any of the work that your students do. Those are just suggestions, obviously, for the other students. But for my students for EDI 613, you're just writing the lesson and you're coming up with some planned formative assessments. Okay, back to edTPA. You're going to submit it prompt 4. EDI 613 students, just hang on a sec. There's a slide for you in a second. Once you have taught this lesson, you are now going to explain to edTPA how you collected work samples. So it could be written files, it could be audio or video. Again, you might want to have multiple forms of work samples. And then you're going to get into prompt 4B, which is analyzing the effectiveness of your lesson. So it's how do I know that your lesson was effective? I want you to cite specific examples from your students' work. How did the activities that you guided them through develop their math understanding? Again, with the focus of your objective for that particular lesson. Again, that objective may be much more focused than your original learning segment. So again, your activities really do need to tie in with that objective and need to tie in the formative assessment so that you have specific examples that the students that maybe didn't understand this now understand it on a deeper level. Now, if you're one of my EDI 613 students, obviously you're not currently student teaching, so you cannot actually be required to teach a lesson. So instead, you plan the lesson, right? So now, prompt 4, I want you to answer the following questions. How would you know if your lesson was effective? What would you have observed? How would your students show you they understand? And connect it with your formative assessment. So again, depending on what formative assessment or assessments you might have designed in your lesson, consider what would students show on that to be effective, and how did you know your lesson was effective? Okay, and again, we'll talk about more of this in class. And some final thoughts, again, if you're submitting or if you're one of my pre-service students, your re-engagement lesson, and this is a big one, should not be more of the same. Leverage your knowledge about your students, and possibly you may want to explore different modalities. So if your lesson or the lesson that your CT taught was very auditory, visual, students sat at their desk, they taught, the teacher spoke to them, and they did examples, maybe you want to give them a little more of a hands-on approach. Maybe you want to allow them to discuss and do partner work more. Your formative assessments also, as always, gather evidence. edTPA is specifically asking you for evidence from that work to prove that your lesson was successful. You want to be sure your questions or your tasks align with your objective and include the 3 aspects of CPP: conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, and problem solving if applicable for your particular objective. I would highly recommend my video on questions as well as assessments if you are looking for specific examples in math. Again, evidence, you might want to take photos of their whiteboard work or written work, and you may want to audio or video as well, just in case. So we came to the end. So again, my video on prompts 3 and 4 for your assessment commentary for your elementary edTPA task 4, which is your math component. Feel free to check out some of my other videos that may help you complete this task successfully. Thanks and good luck.